is your host, Benjamin Saxton, and welcome to a Fighter's Chance podcast, where we give people in the combat sports world an opportunity to talk about the things worth fighting for. Today's guest is a Division I wrestler. In 2000, he won the Junior College National Championship for wrestling at 165. The Ultimate Fighter 2 winner, has victories over Stephan Bonner, Michael Bisping, Chuck Liddell, Forrest Griffin, Thiago Silva, Quentin Jackson, Tito Ortiz, Phil Davis, Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen, and the list goes on. He fought in heavyweight, light heavyweight, and middleweight in the UFC. Former UFC light heavyweight champion, inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, a true legend of the sport. Sugar Rashad Evans, how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing fantastic, and that's one hell of an introduction. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, man. Well, you deserve it. I'm very excited for the conversation today. You offer a unique perspective on the world of mixed martial arts that not too many people can say or have experienced. So I'm very excited about your perspective on things.
Oh, yeah. No problem, man. I'm excited to give it.
Yeah, so today I want to just kick us off talking about you as a Division I wrestler. You had success as a Division I wrestler. You also, I know, trained growing up. You had some striking experience, whether that was boxing. You did boxing. You did karate, tank sudo. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how that skill set translated. So when you were a Division I athlete, you competed against some of the top wrestlers in the country, as well as some really big UFC names that came onto the scene. You wrestled with Gray Maynard. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that transition of your skill set into the world of mixed martial arts.
Yeah, wrestling was my foundation, and it was one thing that I felt and I feel that gave me a big advantage over just a lot of competition, just because of the fact that I was used to competing so much, competing regularly with wrestling, and having a regular schedule, and just learning to get down that mano a mano, man versus man type of thing. It was always something that happened in wrestling, but once you learn to just kind of dissolve that part of it and just get to the nook and cranny of what it's all about, and what it's all about is just competing with yourself. And once you get to that level of just learning how to compete against a man, where it just becomes not about him against yourself, then you're competing at the highest level. And that's something I was able to hone and understand in wrestling. So when it came to fighting, I was just more or less just moving that skill set over from wrestling to fighting. And I was able to put in a lot of other disciplines that I learned along the way. Like you said, I did tank sudo growing up. At one point, tank sudo was a sport that I was gonna do over wrestling. Like I was.
Oh wow.
Yeah, wrestling was something that I did after I got involved in tank sudo. But then, after I just got it, I started to achieve so much in high school wrestling. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna stick with wrestling.
You're like, I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it was too. Like at one point, I didn't even want to wrestle. I wanted to play football. Like football was the thing that I wanted to do, and it just so happened that we ended up not doing good in the States, and not like we made it to the States, but we didn't make it to the finals like I wanted to. And at that point, it was like a moment of clarity for me, where I realized that in order for me to get the best out of myself and what I really want as an expression, as an individual in life, I needed to do something that was mano a mano, something that just had just me on the line,
Right.
I couldn't depend on everyone else that was on the team. So that's when I started to more orientate my mind towards just being a MMA guy. Well, not MMA guy, just being a wrestler, I should say.
So I find that very interesting because there has been plenty of wrestlers that have, on paper, that have gone on and just dominated in the world of wrestling and transitioned to mixed martial arts, and just hasn't seen that success. And then you've seen strikers that have dominated in let's say it's boxing or Muay Thai or whatever, and gone to mixed martial arts and just haven't seen that success. from what I'm hearing you say is one of the biggest takeaways from wrestling was that mindset of just, you're a top tier athlete. So it's kind of incorporating all the physical traits and all that training you had, but also incorporating that mindset and that fight IQ with it as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a lot of just understanding, like when you learn to compete against someone else, it's one of the hardest things in the world because, like I was saying, there's no one there to blame but you.
Right.
So with that, it brings a whole nother pressure on itself. And then once you realize that that pressure on yourself, that's just you competing with yourself. And then you start to turn the corner, like, wait a minute, it's not even about the guy that I have to fight. That guy on the fight, he's always going to bring, a set of skills that I have to overcome. But I can overcome any set of skills because I feel good enough to. But more importantly, I have to believe that I can. I have to be able to defeat myself. And being able to defeat yourself is being able to have the confidence to rise above the fear, to be like, you know what, I have this. And once you have that ability to not compete against yourself, defeating the opponent gets very easy because in his mind, he's fighting against himself and you.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. It's like a big battle between you and yourself, and once you defeat that, then it's like essentially like half the job is already done, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, so it's interesting because you're talking about competing at a very high level. I mean, on paper, you mentioned football too. If we were to just look at your resume, right, and let's say it's college football, like your strength of schedule is up there with almost anybody that's ever done this. Your opponents that you've won, let's just say you've had 11 UFC victories, excluding the Ultimate Fighter. 6 of those victories have been against Hall of Fame fighters. And that's not including some of the losses you've had in your career too, which will be future Hall of Famers too. So, I mean, the level, I look at anybody that looks at your opponents that you've had, it's like a murderer's row of competition. It's absurd that the amount of talent that you've competed against and won. I mean, I don't know if you still talk to any of those guys, but I can imagine that you can joke around a little bit and be like, yeah, well, you might have done this, but I still have a victory over you.
Yeah, definitely. It's something to look back on. Like when I look back and just think about the whole ride and about all the great athletes I competed against. I'm happy that I'm able to have this perspective, and it's one that when I was going through the tough schedule at the time, I wanted the strength of schedule. I wanted to fight the best of the best because I knew when it was all said and done, I wanted to say that I competed against the best guys of my time. Win, lose, or draw, I wanted to say I competed against the best guys. And I'm glad to say that I did that. And not only did I do that, I beat a lot of them, So
Yeah.
that makes me feel really good. And it makes me feel good that my effort, the sacrifice, it wasn't all for naught. It was for something that I can definitely hold on to and definitely remember for the rest of my life.
Well, and I think that's a testament too. I mean, you'll hear a lot of fighters that will say similar things, right? It's really lip service when it comes down to like, maybe a matchup isn't really what they're looking for. It would be the best fighter, a very, very difficult challenge, but it may not necessarily be along the right, career path for them. And you may have, and I'm sure you have looked at fights and said, okay, this looks good, this doesn't, but your resume speaks for itself in the fact that you have not shied away from top level competition at any stage of your career. So that's pretty cool. I want to talk a little bit about the Ultimate Fighter because you have a unique experience because you were really on that Ultimate Fighter 2, I believe, right when it was really starting out. Like there really wasn't that many of them. I think you came in as a heavyweight, which you were one of the smaller heavyweights on the show or in the competition. How was that? Because you didn't fight, most of your career, you did not fight at heavyweight. So how was that mindset coming into the Ultimate Fighter at a heavyweight, division? winning it, no less, against some really good guys. I think, was it Nick Diaz that was he in your, was he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in there, Kenny Florian.
No. They were the year. Kenny Florian was a year before I
Okay,
was.
yeah, sorry. But there were some still really good guys with you, and you ended up winning. But what was that mindset of saying, okay, the heavyweight division, I don't think this might not be the right division for me, and then you moved down to lightweight? I mean, obviously it was a great decision for you, but
Yeah.
what was that experience?
Well, going on the Ultimate Fighter show, it was interesting because before I went on the Ultimate Fighter show, I was a 195 pounder,
Okay,
and when the opportunity presented itself, I jumped at it, and I didn't care what the weight class was going to be, just because I seen the success of the first season,
right.
and I'm just like, I had to be a part of that whole thing that Forrest and Stefan did. So I'm like, I need to be a part of that. So when the opportunity came, I bulked up. I used to work security at a hospital, and I made really good friends with the lunch lady, the cafeteria lady. And every single night she'll supply me with lots of like goodies. She'll give me
Oh, that's
lots of mashed potatoes, lots of macaroni, lots of pasta, cookies, all kinds of stuff just to help me pack on the weight. And pretty soon I packed on the weight. I got to about like 225, and I was like, all right, I feel definitely like a heavyweight. And I tried my hand at the Ultimate Fighter show. And when I tried to get on the Ultimate Fighter show, at first Dana White was like, "Bro, you gotta be effing kidding me. You're 5 foot, you're 5 foot, 5'8", and I had guys who had to walk in, who had to duck in to get through the door to get in here. And now you're gonna get taken down and you're gonna get beat up, and I'm gonna have a boring episode on my show because you're too effing small to be here." That's what he said to me, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!" And I was just totally shocked at the time because, I mean, I just got out of college, so I'm thinking it was going to be like a typical job interview, but I was really surprised to see that, oh, it was nothing but just atypical. And once that whole thing happened, I responded with just like a great retort, and I was just like, "Well, I hear what you're saying." I was like, "Well, when heavyweights were heavyweights, when they were fun to watch, they were fast and agile, like Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was like around like 215,
Yeah, even a lighter
217,
one.
a little
Yeah.
lighter." And so I said, if you want to bring some excitement back into the heavyweight division, you'll get some guys that can move around. And luck, saying that sparked his interest. So
All
they ended
right.
up having me on the show. But when I was on the show, my whole mindset every single time I fought was just, I'm gonna fight as hard as I can this time, and just fight as hard as I can. And if I go home, I go home. But it was always just, this is my last fight. I'm gonna go fight as hard as I can. And every single time I said I'm gonna fight as hard as I can, I just kept on winning. Like, I just kept winning. So it was like, it was always my last fight, and every single time I said it, I just kept on winning. So that was a formula. I fight in every fight like it was my last.
That's pretty cool. That's a cool story, because you go from maybe not even being on the show to winning the show and going on to have a Hall of Fame career. I mean, even if you didn't make the show, you certainly were going to make it one way or the other. But that's awesome that you did.
Thank you.
Um, so you competed there. You kind of, I've heard other interviews. You were on Joe Rogan. You talked about Chuck Liddell being one of your, I forget the word you used, but like your favorite fight, or one of your favorite fights of your career. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but prior to that, you had switched. Did you move to Florida?
No, I was still in Albuquerque then.
Okay, you were still there, but that was the big fight that kind of, you were making a name for yourself. That one put you on the map.
Yeah.
And my question to that was, you talk about your training, your fight preparation. You were practicing that overhand. You guys knew it was the left hook and then throw the overhand. Were you doing as much fight prep prior to that, like breaking down your opponent, leading into that? Or is that really the start of when you really started to do the fight breakdowns?
No, we used to always do the fight breakdowns. There's one thing that Greg used to always do, and that's why we always had such a great camp, and that's why we started making a lot of noise. Is that Greg would do such a good job of just breaking down all the fights and just breaking every single aspect of it down. So then when it when the fight happened, it was just like really super easy for us. So with Chuck Liddell, we did a fight breakdown, a fight analysis, but um, the punch that I caught him with, it was just like, so we were practicing throwing the overhand right the whole time, and it was just like a punch that I had some heat on it. We didn't know when it was gonna hit, but we knew if I threw it like I
Right.
can throw it, then it was gonna hit, you know. And before the fight happened, I was just so nervous. I go to Mike Winklejohn, and I'm hitting mitts with him, and it's called a shakeout. You do it every single time before you fight. You do it like usually the morning before the fight, and you do it just to kind of remind your body that, okay, today is the day you're going to fight. Because if you allow yourself to just sit and be still too long into the fight, it can kind of throw off your timing and throw off your mindset. So you always got to do like a shakeout, or I did. So I was doing a shakeout, and as I was doing a shakeout, I was throwing the overhand right, left hook, and I was throwing it so thunderously. It was just like rocking everything. And then Mike said, Coach Winklejohn said, "You're gonna knock him out with that punch, and he's gonna be so knocked out that they're not gonna let me in the cage." That's what he said to me, word for word. And I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, I guarantee you."
That's
So
great.
then later on that day, just like he said, I threw the overhand right, and I punched him. I caught him, and I can just hear them just like screaming and like screaming, like, you know, like something happened. And I see Chuck just falling away from my eyes, just slow motion, because like when your adrenaline is going that fast, everything just stops, and it's
Right.
comes like the Matrix, and it's just like super slow motion. So I'm watching Chuck just fall away in the corner of my eye really slow as I'm in that left hook, and I'm looking out of the corner of my eye in that left hook, and I'm waiting to come out of the turn of the left hook just so I can go and turn and see what happened. And then finally, when I got done throwing the left hook, I went and covered him and seen he was knocked out. I was like, wow, it was surprising to me, you know?
Yeah, I mean that knockout, uh, one of like the top highlight knockouts that there is. When you were in there and you landed that, did you hear the crowd at all, or were you so like tunnel vision? Because I mean that had a distinct sound to it. So
Yeah,
I'm just
it was like it was every the first of all, the crowd went silent. They
yeah.
went silent. They didn't. They were there was like a gasp in the air, like like that. That's what happened. Like it wasn't like a lot of cheers at all. It was like a I'm like, oh my god, like something like that, you know.
Well, yeah,
And
because
I
going
was just like, whoa.
Yeah, because going into that fight, I mean, you've mentioned in previous interviews that you weren't necessarily getting the respect that you probably should have, and people might have been writing you off prior to even going into that fight. So, I mean, that was a big fight, and I mean, you were on the map, but that definitely springboarded you to your championship title, which you eventually won. So that's pretty awesome to kind of everybody that was giving, saying crap and speaking out of context. That was great to see just turn around and silence all the critics, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I want to break down or ask you just knee-jerk response. Of these Hall of Fame people that I've mentioned, and you also have, I mean, you fought John Jones, Lyoto Machida, and Nogueira on the list that will probably end up being Hall of Famers when they retire as well. Among them, Stephen Bonner, Michael Bisping, Chuck Liddell, Forrest Griffin. I mean, the list goes on. Quentin Jackson, T. Ortiz. Of those fights, which one of those guys really surprised you the most in the ring? Whether it was the skill level that they had, whether it was the strength they possessed, which is one that you can remember where you were in there and you're like, wow, this is more than I thought.
Um, I haven't really thought like that in a fight. It's it's just, you just kind of like getting there. You either like win or you lose. You know what I'm saying? Like either getting your butt kicked or you're not. But like I would say, I would say John Jones probably had the most surprises out of everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, John
Who?
Jones, most surprises. He was very tricky. Like, he had a couple things that just kind of threw me off. And it threw me off because, I used to train with him. And then, like, he just added a few wrinkles to the game that just kind of threw a monkey and a monkey wrench on what I was going to do. But I had a couple surprises for him too. And I caught him
Yep.
with him, but I just couldn't capitalize.
Yeah, that was an interesting fight, as you guys used to be training partners, and then ended up fighting against one another. Have you experienced that much in your career other than John's? Maybe not to the same level, but having such a knowledge or experience fighting or sparring against somebody. Have you experienced anything else like that? Whether maybe it was wrestling or MMA.
Yeah, I fought one of my teammates before. I fought Keith Jardine before.
Okay. And
Yeah.
how do you go about, because they know, their strengths and weaknesses, and they know your strengths and weaknesses. So I imagine that you're trying to add wrinkles and you're trying to add stuff, but how do you disguise kind of your tendencies in a fight like that when they're very familiar with you?
Well, you try to at first, but then after a while, after a first punch to get thrown, and after you get hit a couple times, then you're just like, the hell, we're trying to be caged and trying to be slick. We fighting now, and it just becomes about just doing what you normally do, but just try to do it better. That's pretty much it. I mean, you know, like there's only so much that you can add, so much game you can add, and just in a short amount of time, So you just gotta just go with what you have.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked about it quite a bit, but the level of competition and the type of fighters that you have fought is all across the map. Like, you fought some really good grapplers and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters. You fought some of the top striking guys in UFC. I'm curious to your thoughts on the evolution, because you fought for 14 years, close to it, give or take, maybe more than that.
Yeah.
So I would be interested in your perspective on the evolution of the sport, not like, oh, somebody came in and did something completely different, but, as an analyst, I've watched you and break down fights. What's your thoughts on how mixed martial arts has evolved from maybe just a wrestler or a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy? And what styles have you experienced or you've seen as a professional or an analyst caused maybe some of the most problems for, I don't know, different martial arts forms?
Well, I think now we're seeing the era of the new era fighter, and the new era fighter to me is an athlete who does all the disciplines really well, and they go and transcend uh, between all the different disciplines seamlessly without giving any tells, and don't really have a preference for which one to fall back to if they get in trouble or find themselves in a situation of desperation. A lot of the new age fighters, they have the advantage over somebody who has a discipline first martial art background, because when you're a discipline first martial art background, I do know all the other skill sets that encompass mixed martial arts, but it always starts with my discipline first when I get in a stressful situation. Meaning the fact, if I'm getting under attack and I catch a knee, and then I feel like, I can't be, I might be compromising my vision, I'm going to take a shot. And it just may be something that just happens on reflex. But if I'm a new age fighter, I might try to do something different. You know what I'm saying? Just because there's so many more ideas in the toolbox of mine that I have practiced and gone to as a first move. So I have a comfortability going to a first move in all these different disciplines. Whereas if I'm a discipline first fighter, I only got the comfortability to go to that one discipline.
Yeah, no,
So
that's interesting. And also, too, from a fight breakdown as an opponent, right? If you are a wrestler by trade, or, your tendencies, where if you're breaking down and then you can kind of do some in-fight outcomes of saying, like, if this happens, this is his tendency to do. Where if you do have, that
right.
true knowledge of everything, you can't necessarily count on you taking this shot. Maybe you
Yeah.
start throwing bombs back when you're in trouble, or whatever that case may be. I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for someone to break down a fight like that. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Like a good example of a good freestyle fighter is someone like Edmund Shabazian.
Yep.
Just brought up doing every single thing, all the facets of the sport, and he does everything fairly well. He wrestles really well. He has great presence on the ground and pound. Has a great ability to know when to go to a transition to a submission, and that's what the balance that you look for when you see somebody who has got that new age fighting style, like a lot of these guys coming up now. Now I hear guys like, "Oh man, I grew up watching you fight." And it's like, dang, it's been that long already. You know what I'm saying? But it has been. Like a lot of these guys that are coming in now, they're around that age, like 20s, mid 20s, and
Yeah.
20 something years old. So yeah, they definitely grew up watching me fight, and now they come with a little bit of my sauce, but they come with a little bit of Anderson Silva, a little bit of John Jones, and
Yep.
they have it's like the whole style all figured out, and they move so fluidly. So these guys nowadays, they're really dangerous. They're really dangerous, but also, you know, like Derek Brunson still showed that some of the old dogs still can compete.
Oh
Still can
yeah.
compete with some of the new guys.
COVID kind of shut everything down. It kind of it definitely put a wrench into everybody's plans, and especially in the fighting world, it kind of shut down too. Where it's people are having a hard time training, and things are now starting to open up. But one thing that I have, I look at this as a positive. I mean, let's just say from the perspective of mixed martial arts and the UFC in particular, we had a month of Fight Island, right? There was a ton of events that happened, but I think more importantly, we started to see a lot of new talent being introduced into the UFC, which I find very exciting because you're starting to see a lot of these international fighters that you wouldn't necessarily see over here in the States, and it's interesting because I think some of those are just very different styles than we're used to seeing. Your straight discipline, that new era of fighter. Uh,
Hmm.
so I think that's pretty interesting. Whether it's Fight Island or now that we're having them in Vegas again, we're starting to see a lot of debuts and a lot of
Fresh
fighters that
talent.
show a lot of promise.
Yeah, and it's almost like these fighters are just fighting with just a different why behind them. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like they're just fighting just so much harder. And it's as if like they know the world is watching them and they're out there just representing the UFC to the best because with this whole pandemic, like I've seen some of the best fights that I've seen in the UFC in the last 10 years has been during this pandemic, and it's in the last span of 6 months or so. So
Why do you think that
they
is? Because I 100% agree with you. Like it just seems like every card now has like just highlight wars in it. Like ones that at the end of the year, it will be like, is this a candidate for fight of the year? Is this a candidate? So why do you think that is?
I think it's because and it's crazy as novel as it has become with the UFC putting on the fights. We're still the only the only sport in the game, So being the only sport in the game, no matter how many fights they're still putting on, each and every single fight card is still getting the news heading, is still getting the press clippings, and that's something that was not typically seen before. So now, it may slow down with just like with the recognition, but the fighters understand that these fights that they're fighting for, they're understanding that there's so much more to it. There's so much more that they have to fight for, and there's so much uncertainty in the air that even subconsciously these people are just fighting hard because they don't know if they're going to if they're not going to be able to compete. And I think that it's also everyone competing with just feeling just the grace of being able to compete. You know,
Right.
you
Oh
know,
yeah, yeah.
like just feeling graceful. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. So. Oh, cool, man. I'm sorry.
No worries.
So I think that's what it is. Like everyone is just, they understand that tomorrow's not promised more than anything, and I think the pandemic is showing everybody that. So I think it's making everybody just dive a little bit harder and deeper in what they're doing. And I think that everyone can kind of feel that it's like, man, I've been sitting around for so long. When it's my chance, when I get my chance to shine, I'm gonna do it. Because we all been kind of just doing what we have to do to get by, but we waiting for our chance, and I think everybody can kind of feel that energy from the fighters.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, I can't let you go without giving me some fight breakdown of what you think is going to happen. There's two big fights coming up: Stipe versus Cormier 3, which I think we can agree that it's one of the greatest. The winner basically gets to call themselves one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, the GOAT. And then you have Gaethje versus Khabib coming up. Let's start with Stipe versus Cormier from your analyst. We'll put your fighting your analyst hat on now. How do you think that fight shakes out? This is the third time now they're fighting, a lot on the line. DC's talking about walking away now. This is it. How do you think this shakes out?
It's going to be very interesting, because if DC follows a formula that he had the first two fights, and I say the first two because right before DC got caught with a series of body shots that really ended him, I thought that he was pretty much dictating what was going on with the feet. I thought he was winning the striking exchange, and for the most part, he was winning the striking exchange just because the range in which he was fighting from. He fights really good in that phone booth type of style, and that way, if Stipe throws something that DC doesn't like, then DC can clench him up and just jam up whatever he does. So DC fights really well from that range. Stipe is going to have to do a better job of this fight, just making sure he keeps DC at the end of his punches, even with the jab, even moving forward, and also visit that body early, start tapping that body early, start touching to the body early, really start digging into the body early. DC does a really good job, and he's hard to hit up top, and that's one of the reasons that makes DC so hard to knock out is because he's the way he blocks. You want to punch him in the head, and you feel like you can punch him in the head, but he does such a good job of rolling with every shot. It's hard to really land that clean shot. And what ends up happening is he ends up taking a lot out of you before you land that one clean shot. So the best way to land a clean shot on DC is you got to start digging in his body often and early. And the more you start hunting his body down, the more it's going to be easier to find that head and to land those shots that really start to knock him out. So that's what Stipe is going to have to do early. But DC is going to have to do what DC does, and DC is going to have to make it a close fight and mix in the wrestling. Make Stipe has to have to dig into that wrestling pedigree that he have and defend some shots. Make him have to really dig in there to defend some shots and really have to sprawl and break into that part where he tries to dig in to stop, and he gets the anaerobic threshold in his muscles. But more importantly, if DC does not get Stipe to the ground, that's just fine and dandy, because what substitute for getting someone on the ground is if you can get their back flat against the cage. If DC can get Stipe's back flat against the cage and work him from there and work his pop shots, eventually at some point he will be able to get Stipe down to the ground with the takedown at that point, and then at that point DC will be able to just melt him away. But he has to fight him from the phone booth. That's how I see it happening, man.
No, that's a really interesting breakdown, and thank you for that. We'll see how that shakes out, and then the fight with Gaethje versus Khabib. Khabib is 28-0. Says he's only fighting 2 more times. Gaethje coming in kind of ruined the party for the Tony Ferguson Khabib, but that's mixed martial arts and that's fighting, right? Tony could have waited.
Yeah.
He could have waited and he would have been in this spot, but he's a gamer just like yourself. He took the fight and unfortunately it didn't go his way. So now we have Gaethje versus Khabib. What Do you think we see a blemish on Khabib's record, or is he gonna take another one out?
I mean, if there was going to be a blemish, now would be the time. And I say that primarily because of the fact that this is a Justin Gaethje who has been fighting way better than we've ever seen Justin Gaethje fight before.
Mm,
Not only because of the fact that he's been able to go toe to toe and just defeat giants, as in Tony Ferguson, but it's how he's been able to do it. And it's the same brutal style, but he just added a few more wrinkles that just makes that brutal style that much more devastating. And it makes it more plausible that we may see him around longer in the UFC because now he gets off at angles. He's
right.
getting off at angles and he's not standing in front of his opponents taking the big shots anymore. And more importantly, he's getting off to the angles where he's leaving his opponents searching for where he was last at. And then
Mm.
that's when they fall into victim to those big shots. He kept Tony Ferguson all day, all
Oh
night,
yeah.
guessing where he was just at and just popping him with those big shots. Now you're taking the fact that this is going to be an intangible. You have the likes of Kamaru Usman, who did his last camp training with Justin Gaethje, and getting ready for his fight. So you have to you have to think that working with somebody on the lines of Kamaru Usman, being able to get back up, survive all of that and be able to keep the fight where he wants to then is tough. So you can just imagine how it's going to be, how much that helped him out with with uh with going against Habib.
Yeah.
So he has a pretty good chance, and then you also have a Habib who's coming into this fight with a lot going on.
Yeah. A
This
lot of
this
personal
this
stuff.
this is a Habib who has a lot of personal going on, and the kind of things that he has going on personally, it can propel you or it can destroy you, and only he knows what that's going to do. But I mean, you have to think that for someone who has had a career that's been dedicated to his father, dedicated to having his dad be that guy to mentor him and bring him on a level. It has to be hard to go out there and then compete when he's not there, when you don't have him in your corner. I had a coach that I competed for. His name was Mike Van Arsdale, and I love Mike Van Arsdale, and it was the hardest thing for me to compete when he wasn't around, because for some coaches you compete for your coach, so it's going to be interesting to see with what Habib comes to the octagon. But I mean, if he channels this the right way and he channels this like, been training twice as hard and getting his mind right more than ever, then it can be a pretty scary Habib come
Yeah.
fighting.
I don't think that this should happen, but as an analyst, and you'll hear it. Do you think Gaethje's kind of in a, let's just say he shocks the world, and it's not even a shock. I mean, he has a chance to win this fight, but let's say he does get a victory. Do you think people give him the credit that he'll deserve for beating Khabib, or do you think they'll place it on exactly what you just said with, Habib just maybe wasn't in the right mental state, or because he's been so dominant for so many years?
Yeah, I think it all depends on how he beats Habib. I think the
Okay.
how really matters. You know what I'm saying? If he just goes out there and just knocks him out in the most vicious kind of way, and it's kind of along the lines where people can say, well, he did get caught by Michael Johnson or whatever the case may be. People can say that they've seen it coming. Oh, I've been seeing it coming. I knew he was gonna get knocked out. When how people always do that, right? When
Yeah.
Anderson Silva got knocked out, they're like, oh man, I knew one day he was gonna get caught doing all that stuff he does. So I'm sure that they'll be able to say that. But if it's like a close one, a barn burner, then they might say, yeah, his mind just wasn't right. He just wasn't sharp as he normally is. Then that will be the talk then.